Is it possible for a nation to find true resolution after being forcibly divided by foreign ideologies and a devastating conflict? Welcome to our comprehensive investigation of the 71st most significant event in the entirety of human records, the monumental struggle known globally as the Korean conflict. This historical disaster fundamentally reshaped the 20th century and established a lasting geopolitical division that continues to influence international relations in the present era. We shall examine the complex regional roots and the diverse social contexts that ignited this explosive confrontation on the morning of June 25, 1950. The narrative commences at 4 in the morning when Northern Communist forces launched a coordinated surprise assault across the 38th parallel. Supported by over 200 Soviet-manufactured armored vehicles, the invading army achieved rapid territorial gains against an ill-equipped and outnumbered Southern defensive force. Within only 72 hours of the initial offensive, the strategic center of Seoul was occupied, forcing a desperate civilian exodus toward the south. The international community responded through the United Nations Security Council, which passed Resolution 83 to authorize collective military assistance for the Republic. Early American intervention arrived in the form of a small battalion known as Task Force Smith, which suffered a crushing defeat near Osan. By the end of July, the defensive perimeter had shrunk significantly to a small pocket around the southeastern port city of Busan. Military historians emphasize the critical logistical challenges faced by the global coalition during these initial weeks of retreat and reorganization. Tactical maps from this period illustrate the overwhelming momentum of the northern surge and the fragile state of the remaining defensive lines. The embattled coalition forces established a rigid 140-mile defensive boundary that became known as the historic Busan Perimeter. This pivotal stage was characterized by a brutal war of attrition where defenders held their ground with their backs against the vast sea. Despite sustaining heavy losses, the perimeter remained intact due to a continuous flow of personnel and absolute control over the surrounding air. Lieutenant General Walton Walker skillfully managed the available assets to repel the most relentless offensives launched by the Northern High Command. By late August, the arrival of significant reinforcements shifted the numerical balance in favor of the international mission for the first time. Archival records revealed the extreme pressure placed on the supply lines and the resilience of the infantry units guarding the jagged terrain. The failure of the final communist assault on the last day of August marked a decisive turning point in the defensive strategy. Every soldier within the enclave understood that there was no possibility of further retreat without facing total annihilation in the ocean. General Douglas MacArthur orchestrated a daring strategic maneuver named Operation Chromite to strike deep behind the established enemy combat positions. A massive armada of 261 naval vessels transported over 75,000 personnel to the treacherous tidal flats of the Incheon Harbor. This brilliant tactical gamble achieved complete surprise and successfully severed the primary supply routes of the occupying northern military forces. The recapture of the capital city by late September symbolized the restoration of sovereignty and the collapse of the initial invasion. Thousands of communist soldiers were trapped and surrendered as the international coalition advanced rapidly from both the north and the south. Dramatic footage from the era captures the moment when the first wave of Marines scaled the high stone walls of the harbor. The strategic impact of this amphibious assault remains a masterpiece of modern warfare and a crucial element in the liberation of the nation. Military analysts point to the extreme environmental risks associated with the high tides and narrow channels that MacArthur boldly navigated. Encouraged by recent victories, the objective of the mission shifted toward the total unification of the entire peninsula under a democratic system. On the 1st of October, Southern troops crossed the original dividing line, followed shortly by a massive contingent of international coalition forces. The subsequent occupation of the northern capital of Pyongyang represented the near completion of the liberation and the total defeat of the regime. Despite repeated warnings from neighboring communist powers, the advance continued toward the Yalu River, which formed the border with mainland China. The rugged northern geography and the onset of a bitter winter began to strain the communication and logistics of the dispersed units. Overconfident leaders dismissed reports of external intervention as they pushed their exhausted troops toward the final goal of a unified state. Tactical dispersals across the mountainous terrain left individual battalions vulnerable to a sudden and massive counteroffensive from a new enemy. Historians often debate the decision to ignore the intelligence regarding the accumulation of foreign volunteers along the northern frontier. Nearly 300,000 foreign volunteers secretly crossed the border under the cover of night to launch a catastrophic counteroffensive. The resulting engagement at the Chosin Reservoir became a hallmark of human endurance, where soldiers fought in temperatures reaching -35 degrees. Surrounded by overwhelming numbers, the international forces conducted a heroic breakout toward the eastern port of Hungnam for a massive sea rescue. This retreat covered over 120 miles and remains the longest withdrawal in the proud military history of the United States. The second fall of the capital city in early January signaled a terrifying regression and a new phase of global confrontation. Archival records describe the horrific conditions where frostbite was as deadly as the constant barrages of artillery and small arms fire. The evacuation of over 100,000 civilians and military personnel from the harbor was a miracle of maritime logistical coordination. Every veteran from this period recalls the biting cold and the relentless waves of attackers that seemed to emerge from the darkness. General Matthew Ridgway assumed command of the demoralized forces and implemented a new strategy of concentrated artillery and superior air power. The subsequent operations, known as Killer and Ripper, utilized a meat grinder tactic to inflict unsustainable casualties on the occupying communist armies. On the 14th of March, the capital city was reclaimed for the fourth and final time, stabilizing the front near the original border. This revitalization of the coalition demonstrated the enduring resolve to resist aggression and the effectiveness of modern combined arms warfare. The high-level dismissal of the Supreme Commander for insubordination highlighted the complex relationship between military leadership and civilian government. By the end of spring, the front line had solidified into a series of fortified positions that promised a long and difficult struggle. Detailed surveys of the reclaimed territories revealed the immense destruction of infrastructure and the suffering of the local population. The strategic focus shifted towards securing a defensible boundary rather than pursuing a total victory that risked a wider global war. The opposing Communist Command launched their largest operation of the entire conflict, deploying over 700,000 personnel in a final offensive. UN forces, including the brave Australian and British units at the Battle of Kapyong, successfully blunted this massive human wave assault. It became increasingly evident that neither side could achieve a decisive triumph without triggering a catastrophic Third World War. Initial diplomatic gestures led to the commencement of formal armistice negotiations at the site of Kaesong in July of 1951. The nature of the combat transformed into a grueling stationary struggle, reminiscent of the trench warfare seen in the first global conflict. Strategic bombing campaigns targeted industrial assets and infrastructure to force concessions at the negotiating table. Historians emphasize the role of the Soviet Union in initiating the dialogue that eventually led to a cessation of active hostilities. Every mountain ridge became a site of extreme violence as both sides fought for small tactical advantages during the slow peace process. For the next 2 years, the war settled into a bloody stalemate characterized by horrific battles for strategic locations like Heartbreak Ridge and Porkchop Hill. The intense strategic bombing campaign resulted in the destruction of approximately 85% of all structural assets in the Northern Territories. Negotiations frequently stalled over the complex issue of prisoner repatriation, as the coalition insisted on the principle of voluntary return. Soldiers on both sides endured the monotony and the sudden violence of a static front that claimed thousands of additional lives. Detailed archival footage illustrates the daily life of infantrymen living in elaborate tunnel systems and mud-filled trenches along the boundary. the human cost continued to mount as tactical commanders ordered costly assaults on fortified heights that offered little strategic value. Statistics from this period reveal a staggering expenditure of ammunition and a persistent state of high alert readiness across the entire line. The political landscape was also shifting as new leaders emerged in both Moscow and Washington, seeking an end to the costly impasse. Every hill and valley along the current line of contact became a symbol of the enduring division and the high price of ideological conflict. The signing of the Korean Armistice Agreement on July 27, 1953 at Panmunjom established a fragile but lasting ceasefire. A 4-kilometer-wide demilitarized zone was created to physically separate the opposing armies and prevent the resumption of active combat. The final human toll was staggering, with at least 2.5 million lives lost and millions more wounded or displaced. South Korea suffered nearly 1 million civilian casualties, while the Northern Territories experienced a similar level of total devastation. This conflict ended without a formal peace treaty, leaving the peninsula in a state of technical war that endures to this present day. Today, more than 1.5 million personnel remain poised on either side of the most heavily fortified border in the world. The legacy of this forgotten struggle serves as a somber reminder of the extreme human cost of political polarization and ideological division. We must honor the memory of the fallen and the resilience of those who rebuilt a thriving society from the ashes of total war. As we conclude our examination of this 71st top event, we hope this detailed analysis provides a foundation for understanding the ongoing complexities of history. Thank you for participating in this historical journey. 구독과 좋아요를 눌러주세요. 감사합니다.